Welcome to the ultimate guide to Gamesense, and all the information that will follow will be applicable to any game that has this feature of imperfect information or the fog of war, where you don't have full information and a lot of the battle that you're enduring in every round or match is going to be about trying to gather information so you can make more accurate decisions. So first things first, as you can see, the kittens that we're fostering chose violence today, so please don't be thrown off by my more rugged appearance currently. And I'll take this moment to also throw in a disclaimer for the video too, which is that if you, sir, are here looking for a magic bullet, please kindly turn away, because there will be no such things here on my channel in general. Sadly, with anything that's complex that we're trying to learn and improve at, you have to do it the hard way, which is to put in the effort in the correct way. So those are the two requisites to improving at skills: putting in the effort in the right way. So you can't just put in the effort, you can't just have the right way, you got to have both of those elements. So let's get into the video. How do we get better at Gamesense? All right, so what we have to do first of all is we have to define the thing that we want to improve at, because if we can't define it, then we're kind of stuck. We don't really know what we're doing. And again, I'm not sure where Tim Ferriss got this from, if it originated from him. What can be mentioned can be managed. So here is us doing the mentioning. What is Gamesense? We have to start with the definition. We have to agree on what we're talking about. And so I came up with this definition, and this is the premise the entire video is based on. So I really hope that you agree with it, because if you don't, then you should probably not watch the rest of the video. So here's my definition. Gamesense is one's ability to predict with high likelihood the next series of events in time. Now, there's definitely a few important words here. I would say, the ability to predict with high likelihood, and then events in time. Because time is always an operating concept, and generally speaking, we have to know not just what will happen, but when it will happen. And that is something that we can read. And I think, one way that we can simplify this definition a little bit more, and I hope that kind of is vague but specific enough to cover this topic. But one way we can break that down just a little bit more is we can say awareness plus abductive reasoning equals Gamesense. So awareness plus abductive reasoning equals Gamesense. So awareness is a word that I'm sure you'll all be familiar with. You may not all be familiar with what abductive reasoning means, and that's fine. We'll go through that. But first we'll talk about awareness, because again, I think defining these things is very, very helpful. Because awareness, if we're starting off with this, is using observations and to have something to calculate. So, because if you're trying to read a situation, you're trying to understand what the outcome is going to be, and when it's going to happen, well, we have to have information, data to do that. So awareness is our ability to gather data. Now, there is definitely an issue here, because we can't just be, gathering all the data all the time. I mean, a lot of it's going to be noise. If we put in all this data into the equation, well, I mean, there's just too much noise at this point to actually make a calculation. It's just going to be rubbish. The output is rubbish. So what we need to do is we need to have a sense as to what information is most important. Now, before we go into that, let's talk about, a couple functions of your awareness. So I would split awareness into two things, like conscious awareness and unconscious awareness. So the conscious awareness is this sense of being able to easily describe the situation, the ult count, the player behavior, what's smoked, what's not smoked, communicating these to all my teammates, just taking in these smaller bandwidth details that are more specific. So for example, the Reyna is always away from her team, and she's playing quite aggressively on the lurk timings. Okay, so I know that player plays faster timings. I know that player's a lurk. So I know if I see that player, then it's likely that the rest of his team is probably, over there. So, I'm able to pick up some specific information consciously. Or maybe it's understanding that, oh, this chamber picked up that operator on round 3. Or, this, they started out with this type of default. So they're doing this type of default. And so, I have to expect at some point, they're conditioning me with their pacing and their openings. I have to try to understand at what point are they going to try to switch the pace or switch the opening based off this initial information. So this is like all conscious processing, conscious awareness. Now, the unconscious awareness is super interesting because I would say it really excels in the context of playing esports games. It really excels in solving the timing piece. So I mentioned that in the definition, that we need to not just know what's going to happen, but when it's going to happen. So the unconscious sort of awareness is, this cognitive system that's super high bandwidth, that's operating all the time, that's trying to model the future, that's picking up all these patterns, and all this data is just flooding in. And we can't, consciously define and be aware of that process. I mean, it's in the, I'm describing it as unconscious awareness. We're not conscious of that. But what we get is we get the feeling. So it communicates to us with the feeling. And the feeling is, I'm just turning my mouse right now and looking at the flank, and lo and behold, someone appears, and I shoot them, right? We've all had this experience, and it's kind of an eerie thing because it's hard. We can't really explain it because it's an unconscious process. We just get the answer. There's just it's like there's this foreign system inside of us that's like, yo, like look behind you right now. It's like the best backseat gaming you ever had. So that's unconscious awareness. And again, like I said, I think it's really, really good at reading those macro and micro timings. It gives you that little feeling. Hey, pay attention to this right now, So lastly, I will say about awareness is that the more attention and focus you have, the better all of these systems will operate. That said, you do have to tune the systems correctly. And one of the best ways to do that is, as we move into our next section, by having good understanding of theory. Calculating the likely outcomes requires knowing which information is needed to make the read based on the context. So again, you can't just have an equation. You've got to have the right stuff in the equation. Otherwise, the answer is going to be incorrect. And that's not what we're trying to do. So we have to understand what is information that has to go in the equation. So, one of the ways that we can help ourselves to know what the information is that should go into the equation is by learning more theory, as I said. So one way we can do that, because I want to give you guys something practical to take away, and I think this is the easiest for everyone and the most entertaining perhaps, is by watching professional players. So one thing that you can do is ask questions, ask the right kinds of questions. So what logic justifies their choices based on the context and the information that's available to them? So what information do I think is available to this player? What do I think is the context is? So what type of round, and how are they like really behind? What's the economy? All these different things, like the player I'm watching, what does their role tend to be on the team? Like there's all this context that you can kind of put into that. And then what you want to also ask the question of, what is their objective? What is their team's objective? Now, sometimes you can work backwards and you can look at what they do, and then you can say, oh, what do I think the objective was? Do I think the objective was what the actual outcome ended up being? Or, just trying to engineer this, do some, reverse engineering on this one. It's essentially what we're trying to do, because all the pro players are operating on lots of objectives, and we can assume that they've min-maxed based off of good understanding of fundamentals in the game. They have min-maxed for that objective. So it should, in theory, be the best available demonstration of the fundamental principles applied to an objective. So if we can figure out what the objective is that the players are looking for, then we can see how all of their actions logically builds into achieving the objective. So this is why asking the right questions is really huge. And sometimes, it's going to be, we may not understand everything. And I think one of the best things to do is to get practical experience. So the fake it till you make it thing is kind of the secondary aspect of watching pros, I would say. Because what you can do is you can watch pros that, a lot of people will watch pros that are playing similar roles or styles or whatever to yourself, respectively. And what you can then do is you can say, oh, I really like how they play this site. I really like how they play in the mid round. And so you can just copy their util setups, their behaviors, and just try to apply it in the game. Now, you will be applying it. Obviously, you're not a pro for a reason, so you may be missing some logic, you may be missing some considerations, but that will be revealed to you as you put this stuff into practice in a lot of cases, but not all cases. And so it's not a perfect process, but it is, by getting that practical experience, it's going to reveal the right, like, more questions that we need to ask. And so when we go back to watching the pro, then we can be like, okay, now I'm equipped with more questions. And these questions will lead me to sort of the truth of what the fundamentals are in play. And so that's, I would say, a good practical process that anybody can do when they're trying to improve at how they understand the game and how it works. All right, so we are at the point where I want to talk about abductive reasoning. Abductive reasoning is an important idea to understand because we're all just doing it anyway. I mean, it's how esports games generally tend to work. Most of your decision making, most of your reads fit into this category of abductive reasoning. So how is it different to deductive reasoning? Because I'll be honest, when making this video, I was initially saying deductive reasoning, but then I was like, hang on, let me look at what deductive reasoning actually constitutes in terms of a definition. And I was like, hey, actually, this does not correct, so I must be missing something. And then I discovered that, hey, people actually call the type of reasoning that we are mostly doing abductive reasoning. So let's look at the differences. So deductive reasoning is you using a 100% premise, and then there's a logical kind of following conclusion from that. So in game, I see a raise nade come from a corner. I can therefore deduce that Raze is in that corner because I just saw the Raze nade come from there. So I know with 100% certainty, because that initial premise is 100% true, what the outcome is. Alternatively, if I'm in a 1v1, the bomb is planted and I'm looking to defuse the bomb, I will look at where the bomb is planted as one of my context clues as to where my opponent is playing. But that in no way tells me where my opponent is actually playing. It only kind of gives me some good guesses. So I have to use an educated guess to predict what is the play of my opponent. And so that is the difference. And because of the sheer quantity of imperfect information, we are doing a lot of abductive reasoning. And a huge amount of the battle in a lot of esports games is therefore getting as much information as possible that's relevant to the context that allows you to make the highest quality prediction that is hopefully just correct all the time. That's what we're always trying to do. But again, much like in poker, and it's why poker is more analogous than chess, is this quality of the fog of war, the imperfect information. I have to play this essentially. I mean, we're not consciously doing the math to work out percentages, but we're essentially trying to play percentages. We can't be guaranteeing any outcomes. So that's what abductive reasoning actually means. And so the reason why it's important to understand this is because we want to understand, well, if we're doing this process, well, how do we make it better? How do we make this process better of abductive reasoning? And obviously practice is good. And you're going to be practicing this every single time you play, whether you want to or not, because you have to make so mmany reads all the time. So, well, okay, what can we do otherwise then? Well, if we're practicing it all the time, well, okay, what we could do is we're already working on our theory, so that's going to help us, but we can also constrain. We can constrain the context as much as possible. And one of the ways that we can do this is by using objectives and also context. This is part of what context actually means. Context allows us to know, okay, well, this is not important. Oh, this is happening all the way on the other side of the map. That's not important to what's going on right now. Right, that's right in front of me. That's not relevant. So we have certain context clues as to what exactly we should be looking at. The other thing that we can put in there that can also constrain, what we need to be paying attention to is creating objectives for ourselves. And I've, again, already alluded to this with regards to how pro players operate, because that's what pros are operating on all the time. Every stage of the round is different. Every single round is in some kind of a different state. And so based on those contexts, the objectives will change. And the objectives change because both teams want to win, and the win conditions changed along with the context. So you have to be aware of what these changes actually are. And so then as you make your own objectives, you can then min-max for each objective. And as you min-max for each objective, you've got this great framework now that tells you what information is valuable or not. So that's the abstract explanation, but let's think about it in terms of some practical examples. Okay, so if I'm anchoring a site, there are maybe like 4 types of responses that I can have, and each of those can be a specific framework that's based on the objective. So number 1 could be play to get kills and hold my position on site. That could be 1. 2 could be play to delay my opponents as much as possible on the site. And maybe I'm also trying to like hold backside control or something. So it's like another aspect. Maybe that's like a bonus. Maybe that is a side quest within the main quest. Or 3, play to hold specific space around the site for other purposes. So it could be for purposes of retake or whatever else. But let's say, let's say ascent on B could be one of those, where it's like, okay, I want to play for retake, but I also want to make sure I hold this space because I have learned that this is highly impactful for my team. And if my team has this space and we operate on our retake with this space at the beginning, we're much more likely to win because we can effectively split retake onto the site, the opponents have less forward positions to play, and so on and so forth. Or maybe, lastly, you play for retake. So playing for retake is going to be, you need to live because you want a 5-player retake, and you want to maximize the amount of util you have for that retake because it makes the retake better. So you're not spending util on delaying, you're not spending util on getting kills, you're not spending util on surviving, none of that. You just remove all of that from the equation because that's not what the objective is. Your objective is to play for retake. So you leave the site and you do whatever you need to do to optimize for that outcome, and so that your team can then come in as a retake. And then, well, now we have a new objective. Our objective is to retake. And within that kind of team macro objective, you, within your role and your utility, your positioning, like whatever it is, your weaponry, you will have a specific role and a specific objective in that retake, whether that's to create space for your teammates, whether it is to try to get kills, whether it is to, take specific pathing. Like all of these different aspects are also objectives. And so by looking at the game in this way and having these objectives, we can min max for the objective. There are a lot of players that don't sort of think in this way. And there's also players that just do it, instinctively, intuitively. So by doing this, what we are doing is we're constraining the context. Because now we're saying, well, if this is my objective and I'm not thinking about the entire round, now I have a very specific thing that I'm trying to do. And I only need the information that is relevant to do this thing specifically. And so, that is a really good way to constrain have a constrained framework. So it's very easy to know what data you need. The next example here as well is, let's say you're in a 1v3 and you've planted the bomb and you've got 3 opponents to worry about, and maybe in the current position, one could be on your flank, one could be on your front, and one could be on your side. Figuring out the timings or the sequence of that is very difficult. It's very, very, very difficult. So a good idea in this scenario would be to not be in that situation at all. It would be to try to be in a different situation. So what are our options in that spot? Because if it's just too noisy, there's too much data, it's too uncertain, well, it's going to be way better in that case to also take the initiative. There's another reason why you should take the initiative too, by the way, in this scenario, because fundamentally speaking, you don't want to allow the opponents to coordinate like a 3-pronged push onto you, because that's more likely for you to have a hard time. So one way you can play against all of this is just to say, fuck all that noise. I'm going to push. I'm going to take initiative. I'm going to take control of one of these positions. So now I can guarantee a 1v1 against, whichever player is coming in from that position. And also equally, if I deal with that, and maybe I'm a little bit lucky, because I'm going to pick the position that I may guess will get the first engagement. We'll get the quicker time of the timings of my opponents coming to any given position. This is the one where my opponent will appear first. So I'm going to attack this position. I'm going to take control of it. I'm going to get the kill. I'm going to 1v2, and now my opponents are all going to be coming from one angle. So you've kind of constrained the situation so that now, my objective is to take control of this spot. I don't need any more reads because I've already got enough reads to take this action. So there are spots where you can get yourself out of a spot which is unreadable. This is basically my assertion here. The other thing about this too is there's a passive option where you're not saying I'm going to take control of like the extremities, but you can play in such a position where you only have to worry about, let's say, 2 angles of attack as opposed to 3. So you're in a way better situation where you're going to be more likely able to kind of correctly either guess, or at the very least, it's easier to deal with that kind of a situation. All of this is to say that Gamesense is... it's one of those things that people kind of, I feel like people think about Gamesense and they think it's just kind of this passive thing that's happening. Now, it is, in many senses, it is, but it is also happening for a lot of people because they're doing a lot of these processes I just took you through. They're doing these things automatically without really thinking about it too much. Some people just more naturally have better processes and are just creating all these frameworks themselves, and they're thinking in objectives, and they're, you know, thinking in terms of context all the time. There's players, I mean, I will tell you, like, the amount of professional players that watch Valorant, like a shitload of Valorant, is a lot of them. Like a lot of the guys on 100 Thieves, for example, were always watching. And I actually never really asked them if they have like a process whereby, you know, when they're watching these other pro players, their peers, if they are doing so in just for entertainment, or if they're doing so more analytically. When I was with them, is that they would like watch Valorant from different regions as well, because they would be like trying to pull stuff. They're constantly trying to pull stuff because they need to keep staying on their feet. They need to know what people are doing. And so by just pulling stuff all the time, the process that I took you through with regards to how, you know, you should watch pro players and how that can help you, they're doing that kind of stuff all the time because, you know, they have some different motivations. They're already pros and they're trying to, you know, just find, you know, more and new ideas, but they're also like exposing themselves to different ways of handling these various scenarios. And so that is going to be helping them to continue to innovate and make new and better decisions themselves. Because what often happens with lots of players is you'll get stuck in one, you know, way of doing things. And if you get stuck in one way of doing things, and you get, you know, you're just continually just repeating that, it really sucks because it's going to be much harder to evolve your understanding because you will be limited to just that one track, essentially. And so you may get really good at that thing, but it may also not be the optimal approach for that particular context. So Gamesense is a tricky one because, you know, a lot of people might also think about Gamesense. They may think about, oh, Gamesense is just that feeling that I just knew. It's like, well, yes, it is. And you know, I talked about the unconscious awareness and how, you know, a lot of people experience unconscious awareness where they're just like, boom, I'm turning. I don't know why I just turned, but I turned. I just respected the feeling. I just got a feeling I got to turn. And I'm so dialed into the game right now that I just like turn and someone was there and I shot them. And oh my God, I'm so good. You know, that is, I think, how a lot of people kind of feel about like what Gamesense is. But practically speaking, you are able to certainly refine and improve this conscious awareness as well as the conscious or the unconscious awareness. You can improve both of those things, like I said, by also doing all these other things, because you'll be feeding your awareness higher quality inputs. Because if you are telling your brain that I am maximizing for certain objectives, it will start trying to figure out what are the things that I can do to try to do that better, and what are the pieces of information that are more important. And if you are, you know, kind of repeatedly iterating on these processes, you will actually probably pick up smaller and smaller details to just fine tune it a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And then eventually, you know, you're making big gains. There was actually this idea in Legacy, which is like called 100 small edges. And the idea was that if you improve 100 sort of almost imperceptible edges, you actually have a big improvement if you improve, you know, all these like 100 small things. And by creating a framework that you can kind of refine, you're kind of on the way to doing something like that, because you have something, an initial structure with which you can build on. If you try to build on something that doesn't have a structure at all, like which direction are you building in? Like what fundamental assumptions are you building from? You can't iterate from something that's not defined at all. So that is what we're trying to do with thinking with context, thinking with objectives. We're trying to define the framework, and then we can better understand what feeds that framework in the best way, and that will give us the best reads. So with that said, I hope that this video was helpful for those of you trying to understand what the fuck Gamesense actually is, and what are some of the ways in which we can become better at it in both our conscious awareness, our unconscious awareness, our ability to, you know, think in frameworks, our ability to make reads both intuitively, but also make reads, as I said, when we're thinking like more consciously, because it is both things. It's not just, again, like I said, I have a feeling, because my unconscious awareness is like, yo, bitch, you're about to get flanked and I'm going to turn around and kill a dude. Like that's not the only thing that's happening with Gamesense. So I appreciate all of you for listening to me and for watching. And if you enjoy this kind of content, please subscribe, check out my Patreon to support me as I'm trying to do this full time. And also, if you have any suggestions as to things that you think I should discuss or ideas you want me to expand upon, that you, because with this video, I was thinking, okay, people are searching Gamesense. All right, I'm going to make the Gamesense video that no one wants to watch. That I feel like defines it and actually really goes through it. But I feel like this is not a sexy video for people to actually watch, because it's very hard to this is like very hard to actually apply all of this stuff, and it's also not, let's say, flashy in any way. Whereas at least the aiming stuff is like, okay, you can go and, you know, do an aiming routine and it feels good and your aim feels a bit better and that's fun. With this, it's like, hey man, are you asking the right questions? It's like, who wants, I mean, you know what I'm saying? Okay, so, but someone's got to do it. Someone's got to do it. And it's me. Hello. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.